Let me introduce Bettina real quick. We're really excited to have Bettina Eastman here today. A lot of you actually asked for Bettina to come and speak. So for those of you who might not know a little bit about her, is that she's a wonderful naturalist, super into birds, bugs, everything, and that's luckily what we're going to hear about today. She's actually been with the Sea and Sage Audubon for over 3 decades now, which is really exciting. And she's offered birding guides in the past, unfortunately due to recent circumstances with the quarantine. They're not doing that as much, but there is a phenology study that I'm sure she can talk about more that's offered Friday mornings if people are interested in getting outside and doing something in nature that's still social distancing. So yeah, she's an expert all around at the dangers of plastics, even the ethics of bird photography, which I think is pretty interesting. And that being said, she's an amazing photographer, and I've heard great things about her speaking abilities. So without further ado, I'm going to pass it over to Bettina.
Well, thank you very much, Alex, for that wonderful introduction. I don't know if all that's true, but I'll try to please. Yes, I've been a volunteer for Sea and Sage for over 30 years, and actually because of Sea and Sage Audubon and my hobby of birding, I went back to school after meeting such wonderful people and was encouraged to get my degree in biology. So it was because of Sea and Sage that I actually have a degree in biology and pursued birding as my way of life and so on. I do offer field trips. I do hire out as a guide. The phenology is a little bit different because phenology is a study that we do where we're looking at 8 species of birds to see how climate change is actually affecting their behavior. Are they migrating earlier? Are they arriving from migration earlier? Are they nesting earlier or differently? So that's a little bit more focused, and we do kind of want to pre-qualify for that and have people join our teams, but people are welcome to contact me about doing just that. So I'm happy to share that. But let me go ahead and start my PowerPoint and see if we can't get this ball rolling, because I do have a lot of slides and I'm hoping to get through them all. Let's see, I need to, okay.
Looks good.
You guys can all see that, right? Okay, so I titled my lecture, Have You Heard About the Birds and the Bees? And this is not the conversation that you may have had in junior high school with your parents, but I'm sure you all know in the news recently, we've had conversation about birds and bees. Maybe not this conversation about birds and bees, but there's been headlines last year and earlier this year about insect apocalypse and all kinds of threatening headlines about what's going on with birds and other wildlife. And it's actually pretty dire. We really need to start listening, and we really need to start paying attention, because there are some pretty strong predictions, and I know Alex put some of them in the blurb about this lecture, but basically we stand to lose about 389 species of birds alone by 2050 if we don't do something about climate change, habitat loss, and some of those other really important things that are affecting these birds. So studies have been done. This is on Cornell's site, All About Birds, and there's several places that are kind of taking data from each other, but the main studies were done with subsets of 70 or more studies, so that there's clearly the data there that proves that these things are going on. But one of the hardest hit areas are grassland birds. Grassland birds, we stand to lose 53% of those species. There's actually already a great loss in that area. So these are just how some of them play out. Eastern forest birds and western forest birds are faring a little bit better. And that's probably because they still have some temperature rise to go, whereas these birds that are in the grasslands wouldn't necessarily have that much change that they can tolerate. Here's another figure that shows that even some of our most affected birds are like sparrows, those birds that are going to be in grasslands, and warblers and vireos for some reason are faring better, which I always thought was interesting because insects are a great deal of their food supply, but we have problems with insects too, and we'll get to that. So this is a really great chart that they have on Cornell's site that tells you about who's faring better than others, but they're all being affected. And that would be somebody like the lark sparrow. And so here's some of the hardcore data. The vast majority of sparrows is where we presume the most loss to be. Oops. I'm sorry, I'm sure you can hear that phone ringing in the background. Also, wood warblers, blackbirds, and it increases from there or decreases from there as far as effect goes. But there are some birds that are increasing in numbers. Raptors are one of them. Vireos and gnatcatchers, interestingly enough, are predicting to be increasing, as well as waterfowl. So why does this make me so sick? Because we know that everything is connected. It's all a food web, right? Lizards eat insects, insects eat birds, birds eat insects, frogs eat birds, insects, lizards. So it's all connected. And that's really important. We have a weasel eating a rabbit, or that we have flies eating other flies. We have yellow jackets that actually eat bees or other insects. This is a fly, a robber fly, and it actually will eat yellow jackets. So these insects are really beneficial and really important to us. And how did they discover this? So there was a gentleman that, a scientist that was driving on an annual cross-country trip that he would take. And he noticed on his windshield that he wasn't having to stop as frequently and wash off all those bugs. And so that made him take action or account of what was going on and take interest in how to figure out why that was. So he looked at data from several different studies around the world and did like a meta review of all those papers that were written to find out what's going on. And that's when they discovered that we've lost, on average, about 40% of our insects globally. I'm going to say that again. Already, we have lost, on average, globally, 40% of our insects. Now, he was from Europe, and in Europe, in some countries like Germany, they have already lost more than 70% of their insects. That's huge. That is hugely impactful. And this is how some of that breaks down. Caddis flies, I'll go down some of these. Stone flies, those are aquatic invertebrates that are really an indicator of water quality. So when you've lost 68% of caddis flies and 35% of stone flies, that tells you something's going on with the water. When you've lost 53% of butterflies and all these other things, actually mayflies are a water aquatic larva too. So these are all hugely important to the well-being of our planet. They think that one of the problems is intensified agriculture. So when we create crops, we have acres and acres, well, hectares of agriculture. And it's a monoculture of plants, so that reduces insect populations. And of course, they use herbicides freely. They use pesticides freely, and all of that also increases greenhouse gas emissions. So there's a huge amount of problems for our wildlife and insects and everything by the increased way we do agriculture. Obviously, climate change is in there, and that's going to be a big one overall for the big picture. But for the health of our wildlife, initially our food source, our food supply, what we eat, that is coming down to agriculture and pesticide and herbicide use. And here's another diagram that shows basically the same thing, maybe broken down a little bit more. But the other thing that this obviously will have an impact on is increased fire. So when we increase fires, that increases concerns for human health, people with asthma, sensitivity. Of course, that creates pollutants in the air, which also affects climate change. So these are all really big factors in what we need to be paying attention to. So here's one of my slides about intensified agriculture. You know, it increases a large monoculture of plantings. Native plants around that habitat zone are often removed, and so the insects have nowhere else to go. Even if they were insects that would like a particular plant, those plants are gone. I've already mentioned these things: consistent use of pesticides and fertilizers, and then eliminating some of these things also eliminates flies that would otherwise be pollinators. You know, bees aren't the only ones that pollinate. There's flies that pollinate, and all kinds of other organisms that help us keep our agriculture going. In fact, down in Imperial County, which is a huge agricultural area for us that provides a lot of our vegetables and fruits, they already are having to use flies to pollinate their crops because we have had such a decline in bees. So here's another graph that shows the aquatic insects are in the biggest trouble overall in proportion to the other types of insects. And this, can you see my pointer, Alex? Yeah, so Trichoptera are some of those caddis flies and freshwater flies that give us an idea of how healthy water is, because they can't survive in unhealthy water. They die off quickly. And if you look at this graph, it shows the extinction already of such a huge percentage of those species. The goldish or orangey color is endangered. This shows vulnerable, and then this is the overall decline of some of these big taxa. But ordinates, those are dragonflies and damselflies. Look how many of those are in decline already also. So this is a huge thing that affects, and that of course affects birds, right? Because birds like American kestrels, they eat dragonflies. All kinds of other birds, kingbirds, flycatchers eat dragonflies. So a lot of impacts to that food web. And moths are a huge portion of insects that are on the decline. This shows kind of the cause and effect. This was done out of the University of Helsinki, and they talk about climate change, invasive species, because sometimes invasive species with the decline of our own native species are allowed to increase in their numbers because they're able to perhaps tolerate pesticides and fertilizers and things like that more readily. That's why they become agriculture pests that we are trying to get rid of because they do well, that they are somehow able to adapt, whereas a lot of our natives aren't able to do that. So this also talks about the cause and effect. So the effects might be that the phylogenetic diversity is altered. The functional diversity, of course, is going to be altered, like we talked about with the dragonfly die-off. That's going to affect kestrels and things like that. So all of these things are truly interconnected and truly things that we need to be concerned about. Bumblebees. There's a huge decline in native bumblebee species. And I actually see oftentimes European honeybees out in wild areas. So I wonder myself, and haven't really found or had the time to really do the research, how impactful honeybees are now on our native bees, which is an additional pressure they don't need, because we have so many people with great intentions, and I really don't know how negatively impactful it might be, but we have people trying to save the honeybees by having more honeybees, and then where pesticides and fertilizer and things are used, I would think the honeybees would go away from those negative impacts and then find these native resources, and then perhaps even outcompete some of our natives. So this is on the right is a European honeybee, and on the left is just one of our native bee species, of which there's, you know, thousands of native bees. This is actually in my front yard where I have native plants, but you know, you can see the size difference. They're coexisting, but oftentimes I've seen a honeybee come in and spook somebody off of a flower. So it makes me wonder if that might not be part of the impact. And then of course, this is an introduced species. So this is a syrphid fly from the Canary Islands, or part of Spain. They've been accidentally, I assume, introduced here into North America, and so that they may be impacting some of our native species. But I took this also in my yard. So, and then the limited amount of resources, right? We have a butterfly using the same flower as a bumblebee, but actually when I was taking this picture, this was in Crystal Cove State Park, there was only a few flowers, and everybody was coming into these flowers trying to use these flowers. There was diurnal moths and bees and butterflies, and they were all coming around these flowers trying to get nectar and pollen. And this is a specialized bee. So we have a squash bee, and the squash bee is specialized to certain types of flowers, and I know in my yard, we try to grow crookneck squash, and we have a heck of a time. Part of that is because we've so changed the DNA or the production of the plants to favor female blossoms, so we get more food, that we don't have enough male blossoms around for the bees to cross-pollinate and make sure that the fruit grows. So we get little teeny squash that never go because they aren't getting properly pollinated. So I actually went out there the other morning and tried to pollinate them myself by hand, but we'll see how that worked. And then there's specialized bees like this bee. This is a mason bee. This is up in the mountains. This is some mountain lupin or some flavor of lupin. And this particular bee weighs just the right amount to land on that flower, open it up so that it can crawl in and get the pollen. Well, when those are gone, then that flower won't be able to be pollinated. And we're hopeful for these grasshoppers, because grasshoppers are one of the ones that are really in trouble, locust grasshoppers. And of course that has to do with agriculture, right? Growing of food crops. And we don't like grasshoppers around our food crops because they eat them. But here's some ideas of things that you can do, perhaps, to help insects. So you could avoid mowing your garden frequently. better yet, you could actually get rid of the lawn and put in native plants. That's what we did at my neighbor and myself. Let nature grow more to feed the insects. Stop trimming so much that, especially of course during the breeding season, but stop trimming so much so that those flowers are there, so that the pollinators have food, and so on. Avoid pesticides. Go organic with your foods and your yard. Especially in your own yard, you have control. You don't have to put any type of pesticide, even, or I don't even use weed killer, anything. Leave old trees and stumps. You guys know this. Dead trees have more life in them than anyone can ever imagine. There's so many species that break down that tree that provide food for other animals. Build insect hotels. Build little bee coveys that will help support some of these mason bees or other bees that will use a cavity. Reduce your carbon footprint, obviously, is super important. And that has to do with the food that you eat too. Support volunteer organizations such as OCSCB and Sea and Sage Audubon. Let us help you figure out how we can move this planet towards a sustained life instead of killing things off. I worry for young people like you, Alex, and others that will have kids that may grow up without birds. It terrifies me to think about. So don't introduce non-natives into areas. Don't release birds like, forgive me, Joanne, the Sweenhose white-eye probably was introduced from Hawaii. And yes, it's a beautiful little bird that is visiting our yards, but I'm concerned for the bush tit because it follows a similar niche, and I don't see nearly as many bush tits in my yard anymore, and I constantly have Sweenhose white-eyes. So that's a big thing. Of course, now it's a little late for that, but people don't understand their impacts when they do things like that. They think, oh, what a beautiful little bird. You know, what could it hurt? I miss its song from back home or wherever I came from. And it can be very, very impactful. And of course, always look for insects and other wildlife. So we need everything from these big, beautiful cats to scary things like the scorpion. I actually once saw a California thrasher eating a scorpion in the middle of the day. It was pretty cool. That was also at El Dorado, or I mean El Morro Canyon. And of course, marine mammals. Eliminate your plastic use. I try to reduce every amount of plastic wherever I can. Specialty birds like the flycatchers, and just our common seed-eating birds. If they're native in grasslands, they're in trouble. And then we have to always think about these wonderful decomposers. They said one of the other huge hard-hit groups is ground-dwelling beetles, because of course they're probably walking through that agriculture being herbicided or pesticided or, you know, smashed with equipment, whatever those type of things are. So I'm seeing someone come in. And then this is a spider, and yes, we have to save spiders. As much as people don't like spiders, they're really important too. So what can we do to help maintain this balance? National Audubon Society has a wonderful, wonderful website. They've been working for centuries on helping preserve birds and other habitat, the places that they live. And one of the things that I really feel is important to mention, especially right now with what all we've been going through with our stay-at-home orders because of COVID, but also because of obviously all the protesting and racial divide that's some places being fueled and other places, you know, people of color and creed and race different are being upheld, which is fantastic. I don't know if you guys heard about, I hope you did, about what happened in Central Park with Christopher Cooper, who actually was a former National Audubon or New York Audubon president, who was out birding in the bramble and was just simply asked a woman to put her dog on the leash, which is something I've done 100 times, politely ask people, please put your dog on a leash. And this woman called the police and threatened his life as a weapon against him simply because of the color of his skin. And National Audubon did a really great statement or press release immediately about what happened and their views. And then they immediately followed that up with Black Birders Week. And I hope some of you were able to watch some of those. They had live Facebook sessions with Black birders in STEM, researchers, educators, and it was very, very uplifting to see all the diversity and all the things that they're helping to do to promote what we're trying, our messages of you know, saving nature. And those people should not have to feel threatened or concerned by being out in nature. And it's something we never ever have to think about, but they always have to think about, which is hugely unfortunate. So we can't do this alone, and we need the help of everyone. National Audubon last year released Survival by Degrees, and this is the very comprehensive study and forecast for what may happen if we don't take action now to change climate change and other aspects of how we're destroying this planet. 389 species, I know our message originally said 400, but pretty close, are on the brink of extinction by the year 2050 if we do not change the planet temperature. So if you go to National Audubon's website, you can either do the search and look for Survival by Degrees, or you can scroll from the main homepage and you will eventually get to Survival by Degrees. And actually they talk about some of those things I mentioned just previously. But Survival by Degrees is, as I mentioned, a massive study that they used over 140 million observations for 604 species of birds, over 70 different sources. So this is no one-off research that is disputable. This is concrete data that shows that we need to make change because the temperature is rising. We'll have increased fires, increased sea level rise. We're already seeing that. I was just this year doing a visual study, a camera study actually. They've asked folks, and I don't even remember now who it was with. Maybe it was on iNaturalist, but they ask you to go out to places like Upper Newport Bay and take photo evidence of sea level rise, and you could, it was wall-to-wall water. There was no islands out there. There was nothing that you ordinarily would see at a high tide. This was at a king tide, which they now have a term for because of sea level rise, and it was just wall-to-wall water, and that's just going to increase. So if you go to Survival by Degrees, you can look at the species on the brink. You can pick a season, summer or winter, and they show range maps. So there are several species here. You can go to some other sections where you can type in the species you're interested in and see what the impacts will be. And so this map will give you their current status and how well they're doing and where they are as far as where they breed and live and all those things during the different seasons. But then you can click on which temperature, this tells you what their status is, breeding or whatever. And then you can click on temperature rise. So you could click on 1.5, 2.5, and then 3.0. So that's at 3 degrees above where we are now. It will tell you what's going to happen to that habitat loss how much habitat those birds will lose because they won't be able to survive there. Now, one of the things that you need to keep in mind is you'll see that some of these species will be moving northward, but as they're moving northward, there's already birds in that habitat, and they may not be able to find the food sources that they know about, or the one caterpillar that they always were relying on to feed their chicks, or, you know, so on and so on. So these things matter. They may be able to move up. Some, of course, the Arctic species aren't. They have nowhere else to go. They need that cool weather. If they don't have it, it will be too late. But it's fascinating to go look at their maps. You can go study it on your own and find out. And they, of course, show you the bird species that are at risk. So how can you help? National gives you ideas of how to help. One of the things I would implore you to do is go read the special climate issue of National Audubon magazine. It is a wealth of information that will tell you more than I've been able to tell you in this short period about these losses and what we're facing. You can go to their site. Again, this is the homepage, and you can click on things that you can do. And one of the most important things right now that's immediate is that the Department of the Interior is trying to completely eliminate the protections of the Migratory Bird Treaty Act. And so we just, some of us at CNSAGE Audubon just did an advocacy meeting with some of our local legislators and asked them, I've sent letters just this last week to ask my representatives in my area to please make sure not to let this happen. You can go to National's site, and when you click on that first arrow I showed you, you can tell Congress and the Department of the Interior not to gut the Migratory Bird Treaty Act. And if you fill out this fast action form, then every time you want to advocate for wildlife, it will fill in the information. Like you see, mine is partially filled in. It will fill in the information so that you can take action faster next time. And this is that you can create your own login and take action. The other thing that we can do is we can protect birds from climate change. And when you go and click on this, you can urge your congressional legislators to take action. And Audubon fills out the form for you. They give you who your local representatives are when you fill out that fast action. And they even write the letter. So you really don't have to do anything, but if you trust that we understand what's going on, that we believe strongly that this is what needs to happen, it's very simple for you to advocate to help make change. And I implore you to do that. Here's the subject. You can change the subject if you want. You can change and add your own personal beliefs to whatever you feel strongly about within the letter here. It will have your address. I've blacked it out for my purposes. And you can actually sign up to get more information sent to you when these especially urgent issues come forth that we need to try to stop, because the current administration is really trying hard to eliminate any protections for wildlife. And it's really important that we not let them continue to do that. And then here again is under conservation, the things that are being done to help with climate change. You can helpfully join us. I meant to tell you that I didn't really want this to be a political conversation. I really don't think that it is a political conversation. I think this really is an everybody conversation, because we all live on this planet. And if we don't stop destroying it, we will all be in trouble. And one of the things that Audubon is really good at is getting other people together to the table to make those conversations happen. And they talk here about some of those solutions on how we can create change. And they show the bipartisan membership, because these are chapters and members all across the country in all different kinds of states. And the biodiversity of their organization is really fantastic too. They have a lot of really great grassroots people working for them. And in California, some of us in the chapter have worked with Audubon California and tried to advocate for things that are happening to us here in California. And for the last couple of years, I actually have been getting more and more involved in these types of things. And I actually flew to Sacramento, where California Audubon set up meetings with my representatives so that I could advocate for birds and wildlife and habitat and the Salton Sea and things that are important to us. And this year they did it via Zoom because, of course, of COVID-19. But I'd highly recommend that you get involved in that. It's very rewarding. We had over 300 people this year because it was on Zoom instead of flying up to Sacramento. But anyone within California can join us to do that. This is actually a piping plover, so this is an eastern bird. But this talks about how we've been advocating as a national society for a very long time on behalf of birds like the piping plover. And some things have been how do I say, doing better. Let's just be optimistic. It also gives you information on how to be an advocate and how to be an advocate in 5 minutes. Like if you have to do something right away that's really important, then there's tips on how to do that. And that may be just when someone in your neighborhood, maybe your HMO or HOA or whatever is trying to trim down a tree. Maybe that tells you how to go about approaching them to say, hey, please don't trim down that tree, there's a bird nest, or something like that. And then here again are those things that I hope you'll go look for on your own about how to advocate about the Migratory Bird Treaty Act, because that's really important right now, immediately. In the meantime, plant some native plants and think about your plastic use. I am a huge, my friends laugh at me because I'm so particular. If I'm ordering something to go, especially now, I tell them on the phone immediately, I don't want your utensils. I have my utensils at home. I don't need your napkins. I don't even want your plastic bag. Just give me the container. I don't need all that extra. We are creating so much waste right now with the COVID situation. It just freaks me out to think about what is going into our landfills at the moment. Try and find truly sustainable resources. Sustainable is a buzzword now, and so everything wants to put that it's sustainable, but how sustainable is it really? Or are they, like they talk about coconut oil, for instance, are they cutting down forests to grow coconuts to make a food that is, you know, good and healthy for you? Find out where that's really coming from. Of course, go organic whenever you can afford to do so. Reduce your carbon footprint by perhaps going to a more plant-based diet. Meat, poultry, and dairy are all huge carbon emitters. I have to admit, I like a piece of red meat every once in a while, so I am not perfect, but I'm really trying to do what I can to make sure I make different choices. Do more backyard birding. We at CNSage Audubon have created a backyard birding club, if you will, or group, and you can find the information on CNSage's website. We're inviting people to join us by registering, and so we send out a newsletter either once or bi-monthly, and so that way you can kind of keep in touch with people. We're promoting it on Instagram and Facebook, and we did a couple of challenges. We did a Earth Day challenge, and actually in my yard, I worked really hard. I spent 10 hours or plus birding in my yard, but I had 47 species come through my yard on Earth Day. And we did another challenge for Migratory Bird Treaty or Bird Day, and I had, let me think. No, I had 49 the first time. No, 49, and then 37 on May 9th, because of course a lot of the migration had already gone through, and that took me 13 hours. So that took me even longer to get fewer birds. But I worked really, really hard because I really wanted to show people, like Joanne talked about finding new birds in her yard. If you really start paying attention to what's going on right in your own yard, you'll find more than you can imagine. Joanne knows this. I even had, it's called dog vomit slime mold, but it's a slime mold and it's in my yard. So there's all kinds of things going on there if you just start looking. And I don't know if you guys are familiar with the 5MR, but there's a whole group actually that are promoting to bird within a 5-mile radius of your house so that you're not driving. Because as birders, you know, we aren't exactly that environmentally friendly when we go birding, you know, to San Diego or to, heck, people go all over the place just to go birding. And so we're trying to find ways to perhaps minimize that, or at least carpool more, or organize things that are closer to home so that we're doing less travel. And I just have a few more things here. Planting native plants. Audubon California has a, or excuse me, National Audubon has a great database for finding native plants that will work in your yard, but also California Native Plant Society, cnps.org. They have a fantastic database that you can plug in your location within the state. You can search different ways, and then you can find the plants that are native directly in your area. And you can sort by color, you can sort by size, if it's a shrub or a tree, or how much water does it need, or will it need sun or shade or whatever. And you can actually save it to an Excel file, you can save it to your own private account. You can do all kinds of things to help plant natives in your yard and make it more habitable for our wildlife. In fact, the natives in my yard have attracted bats in the summertime. So you might even be surprised at what's going to come into your yard because of natives. And here's some of the things that we stand to lose first. At the top of my list, sadly, is chocolate, the good mood food, right? We will lose chocolate due to climate change. Coffee and tea are very susceptible to the threats of climate change. Our seafood, of course, maple syrup, beans, cherries, all these things are climate change related. And they're some of the first things that are predicted to be lost. And of course, increased wildfires, flooding, sea level rise, all these things are connected. So with that, I'd be happy to take questions. Hi, do I need to unmute or mute, or I can't hear you?
Yeah, let me see if we can unmute her. Oh, wait, you're good.
Oh, Joanne has a question.
And you can hear me?
Yep.
Oh, great. Thank you. So for the example of those swing-nosed white-eyes, although there's many other examples, this is the first year we've seen them. We still have our bush tits. But my guess is if there's anything we did to dissuade them from nesting here, if they just go to the next door yard.
Yeah, it's
they're just here now.
Yeah, unfortunately, I really don't, I didn't mean to call you out as if it's somehow you're doing that. It's unfortunate that, I'll tell you, in all the 30 some years I've been birding in Orange County, it was maybe a little over 10 years ago, I was birding on a golf course in Newport Beach / it's Santa Ana Heights. It's right on the border of Costa Mesa, Newport Beach, Santa Ana Heights. And I found the first white-eye. And I'm on the phone, oh my God, I know this is not a native species. What is this? What is this? And they're like, oh, it sounds like a swing-nosed white-eyes. My friends have been to Asia. And they said, well, but it wouldn't be calling unless there was another one. So my suspicion is, could be totally wrong, someone released those birds at that golf course thinking, oh, I miss my birds from home, I'd love to hear them. And now you can find them as far as Westminster, all the way down to Laguna Beach. You can find them at the San Joaquin Wildlife Sanctuary in Irvine. I'm not even certain, but they might even be showing up all the way at Irvine Regional Park now. I can't remember. But they have expanded in that short a time everywhere. They're a nectarivore. They eat nectar and insects. And like I said, in my yard, I hardly ever see flocks of bush tits come through anymore. I see tons of swinehos all different times a day. They're a nomad, just like bush tits. And so they have the same similar niche that bush tits have. So I'm really concerned for our bush tits, but I don't know that there's anything we're going to do about it now. So it's really unfortunate.
Thank you.
Does anybody else have a question, or did I put everybody to sleep, Alex? I didn't see the screens.
Yeah, I thought it was a really great presentation. I actually have a question. I don't know if I can really do it being in an apartment myself, because I can't really make changes to the land, but I'm curious, like you mentioned how like leaving up trees and things like that provide like nesting habitat. I don't know, what are your thoughts on like birdhouses or other things like that?
Well, it's really, I personally, as a biologist and so native focused, I'm concerned. There's two ways to look at it. If you put up a nest box, you absolutely want to make sure that it has the correct opening size and the correct dimensions for a specific type of bird that's native, or how do I say, maybe even more vulnerable would be a better way to put it, because now we know that our natives some are even vulnerable that we wouldn't think about, because you could encourage the increase of birds that we wouldn't want, like maybe house sparrows or starlings or whatever. So I would do my research, go to a site, a reputable site. I'm sure Audubon has something, although I've never researched it, or maybe like Wild Birds Unlimited or something that would have specific, like house wren or bluebird or something that you could find to support those birds. There's even black phoebe little perch type things where they'll come and build a nest on the mud nest on this, it's like a flat board. That might be a good one. Talk to your association or your management and say, please limit your use of pesticides. Please don't trim your trees during the breeding season. You know, please be conscious of what you're doing. This is why. You know, tell them why it's important to you. Get some of your neighbors to talk to them and say why it's important that we protect these things. Because I went, actually, for Christmas bird count, I'm now the coastal compiler for the Christmas bird count. We have 3 Christmas bird count circles in Orange County. And I went to this really old apartment complex with old growth trees that's green and lush. It's called Alpine or something, or right? It's just mountainous, if you will, in green vegetation. We didn't see any birds there. We were scouting to see, because we never bird it for Christmas bird count. We were scouting to see if it was worthwhile, and we really saw very few birds. And ironically, the birds that we saw were by the pool. And I think they even have streams going through there. But I think because they use so much herbicide or systemic food or pesticides that keep the insects from eating their plants and making it look lush and green all the time, nothing can survive there. And so there's just not a lot of birds there. So we skipped it, and I was really disappointed. Yeah. But anyway.
It looks like Michelle T also has the question. I'll let her unmute herself. And then someone also asked in the chat too, just real quick, whether or not you'd be willing to share those literature and website references.
You know, I apologize. I meant to quickly throw up a slide at the end with like CNSH Audubon, National Audubon, and your guys' website, and then some of the sources, and I just didn't get to it. So yeah, I'd be happy to try to put up a document. But the reality is, I'd love you guys to sit down at your computer now that we're all quarantined and do some research Find out who your local representatives are. Find out how to contact them. Go look at National Audubon's website and see some of these resources that they offer that I talked about. But if you do a Google search, especially a scholarly Google search on loss of insects, 1/3 loss of bird population, any of those things, you're going to get a myriad of information just like what I showed you. I even saved a lot more scientific papers to my computer as I was doing more research and didn't even have time to read them all. So it's overwhelmingly there for you to look at. We just want you now to have the desire to do that and make some change. Don't say, oh yeah, we need to do that. Do it. Find the time, find the reason, contact us at Sea and Sage Audubon, contact you guys, and you can forward them to me. Whatever it takes, we really need to start paying more attention. We have to start making some change.
And Michelle,
Does that answer Michelle's question? I don't know.
Oh, Michelle had her own question, I think. Somebody else posted that.
I actually, I'm having trouble reading what all that says. Are those all questions? Or I saw some people.
I actually didn't write my question down. I just raised my hand.
Oh, okay. Please go ahead.
Hello.
Hi, I see your dog. Hi.
Hi. Yeah, and I didn't turn the video on because I'm actually in my garage cleaning.
Oh, no worries.
Things.
No.
So,
good for you. That's what I need to do.
Yeah, I do want to say thank you for this talk. I really enjoyed it, and I love the Zoom format because people with busy lives, you know, we get to do a lot more just learning and you know, attending these talks virtually has really been a game changer for me. But
great.
Anyways, I have a question about, you were talking about HOAs. And I've been working with the HOA where I live, and they're incredibly unaware of, you know, not trimming trees during nesting season, and, you know, the fact that there are natives that exist that can be planted within, you know, I guess fuel mod areas. I'm wondering if you know of a list in the county of native plants that can be used for like pollinator garden, but also are approved within the HOA, because I've been doing some research trying to create a list just for the community that I live in. But if one already exists, that would save a lot of time.
You know, unfortunately, I have to admit I'm not as much a botanist as I am I like to believe I'm a generalist, but I know a lot more about insects and birds and perhaps even herps than I do about plants. I have friends that are botanists, and I usually defer to them. But have you looked at CNPS's website for that kind of information? Because they will.
I was using their CalScape and trying to find information specifically on, you know, pollinator gardens or anything that would attract native insects that would be approved within an HOA, and also native plants that grow well in containers. And those are two areas where I didn't find information. So I'm
the other thing I might suggest is that you talk to Tree of Life Nursery. They might be, because there's people on the ground there you could physically go talk to. And do you know where Tree of Life is? Off of Ortega Highway? Yeah.
I've been taking their classes too.
Oh, fantastic. Well, see, you probably know more about it than I do, Michelle. I'm sorry I can't give you more definitive information, but if you want to send your email over chat right now, I can take a quick photo or just send me an email. I think, did my email appear anywhere, Alex?
I don't think so.
Well, let me see. I could type it on something right now and share it with everybody.
I think someone also mentioned too in the chat that you could try the Native Plant Society for import.
Yeah, well, that's what I was mentioning. Okay. The CNPS California Native Plant Society. So here's my email, and I'm gonna put Sea and Sage on here too. And I honestly don't know the whole, but I'm sure it's just nationalaudubon.org. I really know what the thing is. I forgot, but I'm sure that would work. So here's, make this bigger, and I'll just share that really quick and people can look at that. And let's see, how do I share that again? I know we're running out of time. It's probably been over an hour, huh? There we go. Share. So that's my email address for folks. And Sage Audubon, it's AND sageaudubon.org. And I spelled National Audubon wrong, but I'm sure you get the point.
Thank you very much.
Oh, no, I didn't. At National Audubon. Oh, you're very welcome. So, anybody else? There's like paragraphs here.
Yeah,
so
I preemptively unmuted you. So I think you're good, right, Judy?
Who, me? Nope. Joanne has a question.
Yeah, Joanne.
A simple answer for homeowner associations that might help. A number of cities have planting guides of native plants, like I know San Juan Capistrano does. And homeowner associations often rely or are willing to accept the local city's plant list.
She may want to do a little bit more research on the plants that are on that plant list before she goes to them, because it may very well also be that approved list maybe aren't the best plants that we want. You know, I don't know. I've not done that research, but I'm wondering, they want to always make it easy for people what they could go to the garden center and buy and stuff like that. And I don't know, but yeah, they may, depending on, you know, depending on who's in office at the time on the council and what have you, it could be a very different thing as to how receptive your city even is to trimming trees at the appropriate time and plantings and all those things. I've been doing a lot of work with one of our local cities here, trying to get them more thinking about those types of things. So it's not always exactly easy, but that's a great suggestion. I didn't think of that one.
We have one other question and comment in the chat. It was that I appreciate the comments linking social justice and the issues of equality with conservation, and I was happy to see the Audubon's response to the events in New York. I wonder what Audubon has planned to sustain this kind of work, and if you see a greater focus on environmental justice as a more important component of your work going forward.
You know, personally, absolutely. I think that is something that's we need to make more effort in. And I have to say, I had this really beautiful thing written that I wanted to start out with because of all this unrest that we're seeing, and there's so much controversy about what the right actions are. But I think I have been a little bit complicit in some of the injustice, if you will, just absent-mindedly, like not consciously, because, you know, I live in an area where there's mostly white people, and actually somewhat older white people. And so I haven't really done anything to go out and seek other groups of people, whether it be religious people or people of different colors, so or perhaps sexual orientation, whatever. So I plan personally to try to do more walks that include more groups of people. I know Sage has talked about those things too, and of course we can't do a lot of anything right now as far as that goes because of the quarantine. But National, absolutely, as you saw in the picture of the folks that represent the workers for National Audubon, there was different nationalities represented there. So absolutely, National Audubon does have focus on that, and are increasing their focus on those things. And you know, I encourage you to go to their website and take a look at some of the statements they made. I think you'll be impressed with how important they understand, as we all should, that it is.
Are there any other questions, or is that it? Okay, all right. Well, let's thank Bettina for taking the time out of her day, her Sunday, to come and chat with us.
Absolutely happy to do it. Thank you for having me. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you so much for everybody who came. We'll be sending out stuff following up this event. We'll post this video on YouTube, so you can catch that there if you missed like the first half or any of the questions, things like that. But thank you all for coming.
Thank you, Alex.
Yeah.
Take
Have a
care,
nice rest of the
everyone.
day.
Thanks.
There's a quick announcement in the chat.
Is there?
I just wonder what that's about, though. You know.
Oh yeah. Jess wants to make a quick announcement? Yeah, sure. You can unmute yourself.
I just wanted to let everyone know that the North American Congress for Conservation Biology, which is part of the Society for Conservation Biology's annual meeting, is going to be virtual this year, and they have really reduced registration rates because it is virtual. And it's the end of July 27th through 31st. It was supposed to be in Denver. That's still where the organizing committee is, but it's a great opportunity, 4 days of really great programming, short courses, workshops, and talks. And there's a big focus on like urban wildland interfaces, which is really relevant for our area. So I just wanted to announce that because I think that the conference will be more accessible to people from wherever they are this year. And you can Google North America Congress for Conservation Biology, and it will come up.
You know, I'm glad you mentioned that, because there's one other thing that I didn't mention that was super important in the whole loss of insects thing they were talking about earlier. Actually, 75% of the losses that they recorded in Germany were actually in preserved habitats. So they were protected habitats and perhaps on the edge of agriculture, but those areas that were set aside to be preserved, 75% of the loss came from those habitats. So that increases our awareness and our urgency, I think, by quite a bit. So thank you, Jessica. Okay, everybody, have a great Sunday, the rest of your day. Thank you so much for coming out for me. Bye.
All right, see y'all.